Hello and welcome everyone. I am Dr. Ernesto Vargas Gil, and in this conversation we are delighted to welcome Professor B. Bond, a leading voice in the field of English for academic purposes, whose work invites us to rethink how professional development is shaped within our institutions. At a time when EAP is increasingly affected by the market-driven nature of higher education, shifting policy landscapes, and growing demands on both staff and students, this interview aims to explore how we might reimagine professional growth beyond boundaries of skills training towards something more inclusive, critical, and transformative. All key themes within Professor B. Bond's work. Uh, hi, B. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us today.
It's a pleasure. Hi, Ernesto.
To start our conversation, for those of us who have been following your professional trajectory, but also for those in our international audience who may or may not be familiar with your work, could you tell us a little bit about your professional journey? What key moments or experiences have shaped your development as an EAP practitioner and scholar?
Okay. So I suppose my professional journey, I would say, is the very typical one of somebody who was born in the UK and kind of has my kind of educational background, in that I didn't start as an EAP practitioner. I was a secondary school teacher for a couple of years. Then I took a CELTA and I went and worked in 3 different countries outside the UK, and then came back to the UK, started working at the University of Leeds. So I suppose it's that sort of typical ELT to EAP sort of transition that people from the UK tend to have made, I think, in the past at least. I think things are changing a little bit now. And if you are from outside the UK, I don't think that's necessarily the sort of trajectory for other people but for me, and I think that's always been seen as a sort of typical career pathway for EAP practitioners in the UK. And since I returned to the UK, I worked in a private language centre school for a short time, and then came to Leeds, and I've been at Leeds. So all of my EAP career has been at one institution, and that's the University of Leeds. So for 25 years now, which feels like a very long time when I say it like that. Doesn't feel like a long time in my head. And I think, to begin with, I didn't really know what EAP was. And Leeds at the time was, I think, like most institutions, we still taught students IELTS, and kind of that we didn't really have any way of moving away from IELTS. So my first understanding of what EAP was teaching IELTS for some of the time, and then teaching academic writing and reading and speech, sort of 4 skills type approach to EAP for the rest of the week to pre-sessional students. And I suppose my understanding of what EAP was started to develop as I was teaching. So it's always been kind of a development of my practice, alongside kind of thinking this doesn't quite feel right. I don't feel like I'm preparing students, and then kind of reading to begin with to sort of try and help me understand how to work better with my students and support them better. I think in terms of kind of my career and sort of for anybody, for my name to be known outside the University of Leeds, I suppose a kind of external profile, which I still find a little bit strange, that the sort of key moments for me there were, I suppose, attending Baleap for the first time and kind of getting involved in Baleap. Leeds has always had involvement in Baleap and Selmas before that. So I suppose it's an institution that's always been involved. So me attending and kind of seeing and learning that there were different approaches to EAP, that what Leeds did wasn't the only way, and that people were doing work and kind of researching and thinking about it, having people from outside come and visit. I remember Nigel Harwood coming and talking while he was in the middle of his PhD, talking to us. So that kind of helped me to sort of see that there was work to be done. And then I just out of sort of boredom and interest, put myself forward to take part in the Pilot TEAP scheme in 2014. And I suppose doing that and engaging with that, that sort of structure helped me think about my own approach to EAP and what it might be, and try and kind of connect it to the TEAP competency framework. So I had that sort of structure, I suppose, to help me kind of think about where the gaps might be in my knowledge and what I thought about it. I think the other really key thing for me was an internal opportunity. So Leeds started to focus on teaching excellence, I think round about the time that the TEF in the UK, which is a teaching excellence framework, was introduced, and they wanted to find ways of showing that Leeds was excellent at teaching as well as at research. It's a Russell Group research intensive university, and they created an institution called the Leeds Institute for Teaching Excellence, and they were advertising for people to undertake fellowships or become a fellow. And again, I kind of thought, I'll give it a go. I didn't really expect that I would be chosen. And I think possibly there were not many applicants that first year because and I was bought out for a whole year. So I was given time away from my EAP teaching. And I think that sort of relentless, what happens a lot in EAP is that we are so teaching focused and we teach for so many weeks of the year that we don't have time to just look up. And I was given a massive opportunity of a whole year to look up. And the research that I did there was kind of what informed the book that I eventually wrote around making language visible. So that for me was the real key thing, I think, in terms of any career progression that I've kind of been able to navigate, I suppose.
And besides the change in your own understanding throughout your career and the contact and the perspectives that you have gained through Baleap, what are the changes that you have seen in the sector across time? Where do you see current EAP heading towards in the UK?
I mean, I think that, again, I suppose when I'm talking from a Leeds perspective. So I suppose what I'm talking about is the changes that I've seen at Leeds and possibly projecting that outside. And I don't know whether that's true or not. So I think the shift from a four skills approach and from seeing ourselves as gatekeepers to the academy, where, you know, we almost kind of said, yes, these students are good enough linguistically to join or not. So we don't see ourselves as doing that anymore. And kind of almost that we had no say, no kind of agency in terms of what language did, or it was kind of seen as sort of neutral, as this, you know, we teach the language and then off they go and they do their academic stuff, and there was sort of no connection between the two. And it just happened to be in English, and English had no power. And I think what we've really seen a shift in is sort of understanding the power and I suppose the coloniality behind English as the language as a sort of project globally, and that sort of sense that it's not owned by anybody anymore, but being able to communicate in English can give people huge amounts of power and access to a wider world, but not having equally not being able to manipulate and communicate in English can remove power, and sort of, so I suppose seeing that being a holder of that language and power is something that we need to be careful with, and that there's a lot of politics behind it. And I think EAP before sort of saw itself as neutral in lots of ways, that we were sort of like a bridge, but we didn't have any part to play in it. And I think that has changed a lot, I hope.
And within this context, what would you say are the fundamental challenges and perhaps the greatest opportunities facing the EAP field in the UK today?
Okay, I mean, I think there's multiple challenges. I'm going to put aside a lot of the sort of the structural shifts and changes that are happening at the moment, and I'll return to them in a minute. For me, the challenge that we face a lot is I still feel, and I read it somewhere, and I didn't write, it was one of those things, and I can't remember where I first read it, but lots of people have said it since. I still feel that language is still, it's a kind of form of, it's an ism that people can still feel comfortable talking about. So when we talk about, when I talk to people across my university about language, people still feel comfortable in kind of dismissing and kind of talking in that deficit way around students because of their language, and that's seen as fine, actually, without really kind of unpacking what it means to be a student that's bilingual, trilingual, but is not necessarily hugely comfortable in working in English. So I think that challenge is one that's ongoing. And when I listen to other EAP practitioners, they talk about the challenge of having to explain what we do all of the time. And for me, I don't find that tedious anymore, because I feel try and use it as a way of sort of dismantling those prejudices, I think. So I think that's a challenge that we should be addressing. So it's how people perceive language and its use, and that it's not neutral, and it needs to be visible rather than only visible when it's seen as a problem. So I think that's a challenge that's a positive challenge for us. It's something that I feel that we can actively do and kind of change for the good. Other challenges, I think, are the sort of structure of higher education, the barriers that are in place, the way, and the fact that it's now openly, it's not even a secret anymore, that international student fees prop up all higher education institutes in the UK, and without them, we are now seeing the imminent potential collapse of a number of institutions, which obviously is a threat to EAP, but not only EAP. I think in the past, I would have said that the threat to EAP in higher education was around private provision and the sort of marketisation and the sort of money grabbing around international students, meaning that EAP centres were vulnerable to private provision because because of their large marketing wing, were able to bring more students into the university. But actually, I think that private providers are struggling as much in that sense, not quite as much, but equally as the rest of UK higher education. So I think what's different at the moment is the threats that we are facing are not only for EAP, it's for the sector as a whole. And you can see that in places like Cardiff, where it's not just EAP sort of language centres that are being closed down.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the other threat, and I don't really want to talk about this very much, mainly because I'm not an expert, and I'm still sort of struggling to work out anything about it, is artificial intelligence, and I'm not sure it's a threat or an opportunity or a bit of both. But I think I know people who work in EAP globally are very, very concerned about what that might mean. And I think it's around perceptions of what AI can do in terms of language, rather than the reality of it that is kind of threatening centres. But because those perceptions are not coming from EAP practitioners, it's from people who don't really understand language. I think that's where the threat lies for us.
Yeah, so many people see the origin of some of the main threats in the UK EAP sector these days. This special market-driven focus.
Yeah.
And how do you think is influencing the professional growth of EAP teachers in our field?
The biggest influence is the type, because a lot of centres are kind of focused on that sort of market and kind of meeting the demands of the market and the number of students. I suppose that it's difficult to kind of think about it in terms of sort of CPD, because I think it's that sort of idea that time is money, really. And the time, therefore, is put into working with those students and teaching those students. And I think I sort of referred to it in terms of my own career. When you're on that hamster wheel, Leeds has shifted the way that that our sort of year structure to 2 semesters and then the summer. But previous to that, so when I went in to do my sort of Leeds Institute fellowship, before that, we were teaching 4 terms a year. So we were teaching 42 weeks of a year, which was just all the time. And it was a heavy teaching load. So that's great because, you know, I love teaching, and it was sort of, it's what I see myself as still more than anything else as a teacher. But to be able to teach well, you need to have a rest away from teaching and time to think about what it is that you're teaching and why you're teaching it and question it. Because what I was teaching 20 years ago, I could still be teaching now and be saying, oh, it's fine, students get, but I kind of, you know, I'm horrified when I think about what I was teaching 20 years ago in lots of ways, because I've learned and I've had that time for not just for reflection. And I think CPD is more than, and I would say more than CPD, I've had the time for scholarship, and that does take time and effort and brain power. And I think when you're tired from teaching, it's a really physical and intellectual activity, and you don't have time to think when you're just thinking about the teaching. So I think the marketisation, the kind of increase in student numbers and the need to kind of be in the classroom and working with students removes time from CPD. I think the other thing is, if we're constantly reacting to where the market takes us, you don't necessarily have time to develop expertise in a particular area. I think EAP is quite a broad church anyway. And I know it happens at Leeds, one year you're going to be teaching on International Foundation Year because that's where the student numbers are. And so you kind of think, okay, what does it mean to teach students from who are young usually and are coming for this purpose? And then the next year you might be teaching in sessional, and that could be quite often it's postgraduate students. It could be a sort of subject specific in sessional. So you could go down that route and you learn all about how engineering works, but then the next year you move to something else. So you don't develop a specific expertise if you're responding to the market. So I think getting that balance between needing to teach the students that we have, but also how we can develop our own interests and expertise is kind of, yeah, they don't necessarily meet when you're responding to market forces.
Yeah. Much CPD still approaches language mainly as a set of skills. I think that you have mentioned this in your work, fundamentally as a system, language system, rather as discourse or social practice.
Yeah.
How can we shift towards viewing language as a social, meaningful, and situated activity?
I mean, I think we are in Baleap a little bit, in EAP. I think the last few sort of conferences and PIMs that I've been to, people are sort of starting to talk about that. And I think the work of people like the sort of social justice SIG and a lot of the other SIGs actually, you know, sort of starting to look at things from different perspectives. So there's academic literacy SIG that's looking at things in a more sort of social context. So I think that's kind of happening a little bit, but I think I kind of worry, and it was what I in my book and when I talk to EAP practitioners, it's sort of it's how we can articulate that a little bit more. When I asked people then what we taught, they would say, well, language and skills. And so it's sort of language as a thing, and what do we mean by language? And then skills, I think they were seen almost as separate to language and talking about critical thinking skills. And I don't think you can teach critical thinking skills as an isolated. You know, when you think about critical thinking, it looks different in different disciplines and at different levels of study and sort of expectations. So I think we have to start seeing the skills and language as together and not separate from all other forms of academic communication. So I think the best way of doing it really is to, I suppose, to go back to the previous question, is to develop an expertise in a particular area, whether that be a specific level of study. So it could be foundation year, pre-sessional undergraduate, or a particular disciplinary area. And in Leeds, we do go quite specific. I don't think it's necessary to go that specific, but if we're talking about scientific communication, what do they mean when they're talking about sort of showing criticality, and how is that expressed in particular genres? So I think that the approaches that really we should have been taking in EAP for a long time, sort of whether it's genre approaches, looking at systemic functional linguistics. So it's drawing on our, people keep saying we're experts in language, but we need to be showing that expertise a lot more and kind of being really kind of specific about what it is, and then how that is expressed in various forms of academic communication, whether that's spoken. So we're always going to come back to the four skills of sort of speaking, reading, writing, and listening, but not teaching it as a skill, but using those forms of communication to help students see the sort of social nature of language and the choices that they're making within those genres and different ways of communicating. So that feels like I've gone round in circles and not given a very clear answer to that one.
No. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that my question would be, how can we challenge directly this view of EAP and it's the consequences of adopting this view as just a skills building, or seeing just as a system, basically as a remedial, merely remedial support?
So there, I suppose, when we're challenging it direct, that's with non-EAP specialists, you're thinking. So with the people that we might be working with across campus, it's difficult, I think, is the answer. And I think what's particularly difficult, I sort of always sort of like kind of squirm inwardly when I talk to people in other parts of the university, and I tell them where I work, and they say, oh yes, I was an English language teacher for a while in Spain, or and they think then that they know what we do, and sometimes that's nice because they've got an understanding of how difficult it is to communicate in other languages and things, but they think that what we do is grammar and vocabulary as a sort of deconstructed thing, and so sometimes it's harder to talk to those people than people that have never thought about language at all. And I think that that's the thing, most academics in other subjects haven't thought about language. They don't even question English as a language that needs to be kind of considered, to the point where sometimes and quite recently, we've been having conversations about global citizenship and kind of setting up partnerships with students in other universities. And so students communicating through COIL projects, for example, with students in South Korea, in South Africa, and all of those conversations are going on, and we're doing all this great work, and it'll come to the end and I'll say, nobody's mentioned what language these communications are taking place in. And the reason nobody's mentioned it is because the assumption is so strong that it's going to be in English rather than any other language, that it's not questioned. So it's hard, I think, because that unquestioning of language and the power that it has and the work that it does is so strong in the UK. I think it's working with people and almost working towards doing CPD work with staff if we can, where we support them and we talk to them about things like the instructions for their assessment tasks and what sort of asking them to break them down and show how ambiguous they sometimes can be, and kind of almost playing devil's advocate and asking them questions that we might know the answer to ourselves, but to help them sort of see that how clear they need to be and how they're making language choices that they're not thinking about. So I think it's a lot of work with staff, and it's the kind of work that me and other colleagues at Leeds with our in-session work have been doing for 8 to 10 years now, and we're making slow progress. It's not there still, so it takes a long time, I think.
Yes. You have spoken about the invisibility of language in university policy. How might CPD initiatives help make its role more visible and better valued?
Okay, so I think if EAP practitioners are able to engage in their own CPD, and particularly I think in scholarship, so they feel part of an academic community and they are able to say that they have been published and they develop that sort of strong sense of who they are as an academic. And I think it's really important that we see ourselves as academics in this context. Then it means that we are able to go and talk with more authority in the university about something that we can claim expertise in. Because I worry that if we don't have that academic authority, we are always going to be dismissed as just teachers. And I don't think it matters, you know, I would still say that I see myself as a teacher more than anything else. So what I identify as, but what I can project are not necessarily the same thing. So I can project that academic authority because I've got the sort of research and the publications behind me. And that's what's valued at my institution. Not it, you know, I know Leeds it's a research intensive, so it's what is valued very much. I think at other universities where teaching is much more higher up in terms of what is valued, you might not need to have that as quite so much. So I think that our own CPD and our own scholarship are really important for getting that voice out, that message out. And I think it is one of the things that we should be talking about. I think then with that sort of sense that we have something to say, we can then support CPD initiatives within the university where outside EAP units or language schools, of course, people are not going to be focused on language all the time. It's not their disciplinary interest, but they need to learn about it. So I think that's where it becomes really clearly CPD, where we're using our knowledge and our expertise to support the development and understanding of other colleagues within the university, so that they are developing their practice with a knowledge that language can fit. I think Steve Kirk at the most recent conference talked about how he's been using some of his ideas around and actually he's taken it from Karen Nichols, who is also now at Durham but was at Sheffield Hallam, and I've borrowed his slides and done the same thing at Leeds, where we're sort of taking Christine Tardy's genre sort of structures and working with colleagues to get them to think about how language is kind of built into all of their kind of disciplinary sort of development and what might be missing, and sort of help them think about how they can build that into their assessment practices and their module, their curriculum development. So I think that is where you've got a real strong knowledge base yourself, and you're taking it to develop other people, and it's showing the value of the work that we do. It's not saying you have to do all of this yourself, but it's again how we can, I suppose, hopefully manage some of the threats that we're facing in terms of kind of redundancies. Because if we are seen as valuable and people think, okay, I don't have this language knowledge myself, I can't do all of this, but I can see that there's something that students are going to need, then hopefully we get to work more closely with them, and it kind of develops those collaborations that then can kind of build into the CPD for all of us. I suppose we understand better what students are being asked to do elsewhere, and they understand better what we can do with our students.
Yeah, you talked about earlier about the democratization of English itself. Do you think that can CPD create a space for other languages and knowledge systems? Now, these days, people talk about language justice and injustice and all that. So within EAP practice, is there a space for other languages and knowledge systems?
I think that's a difficult one. Yes, I think is the short answer. I think increasingly, I mean, again, I suppose this is one of the sort of the things that I did 20 years ago that I'm horrified and like can't, you know, sort of the sort of no language other than English kind of policies that I was trained to build into my classroom. I think that it was always impossible to manage and police anyway, because of course students, if you're in a room with somebody who speaks the same other languages as you, it's a natural thing to cross and switch between languages, because you've got that resource that you're, you know, in your head. Why would you not use it? So I think one of the basic things that we can do is make students feel comfortable with that, because I think that they come with a sort of sense of discomfort, you know, that's sort of internalized around sort of English only policies in previous classrooms, and the sort of sense that they're in the UK and that's what they've come to learn, and so they've got to speak in English all the time. I think having conversations with students, but helping them sort of embrace the other languages that they've got and see them as powerful, and again working with staff to allow that to happen, and having conversations around when it's more or less acceptable to move between languages, to use other languages. I think in the UK, where English it's the assumed, but is the likely the only language that is shared in a room between people. I think if, you know, I suppose there's kind of discussions around politeness. If there's two people having a conversation in a language that everybody else doesn't understand, when is that appropriate? When is that seen as rude? I think there's a lot of, I think all universities are kind of working on decolonizing in some way. I was talking to colleagues about this the other day, and I think that there's a lot of work that's gone on, but what hasn't yet happened is the decolonizing of academic genres, academic expectations, what, you know, sort of citations are expected to be, you know, they might talk to students and kind of sort of say it's fine, you know, we want you to bring in writers other than these things, but there is still a strong expectation, you know, this idea that some knowledge is still more powerful, and you can't really write about this thing without citing that particular person. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and because we work in communication, I would say, in kind of academic communication as it is expressed through language, and I don't think it necessarily has to be English, but sort of how it is expressed in different ways, and yeah, helping students feel comfortable in bringing their own language in. I think the other question that we have to address with a lot of our students is, when, you know, the whole point of academic study is that you expand and you change the way that you think, and a lot of that is done through language. You learn new words. I still learn new words in English all the time, and you develop your understanding of those concept words over time. You can look it up in the dictionary or through Wikipedia or Google, whatever, and you get a basic definition, and it's only over a period of time that you really start to understand what that means. And if it's a new word to me in English, it's likely to be a new word to a student, and the first time they come across that word is the English word. Can they then translate it? And is the translation direct in terms of the meaning and the cultural underpinnings of it. So I think we have to work with students to help them manage that knowledge in a way that when they do return to their own country, which most of them do and want to, that they're able to take that knowledge with them and communicate around it with people in their own language, because they might not have the vocabulary in their own language to do that. So I think we have to bring in other languages, because the purpose that students are learning English for is to be able to express their academic understanding, and they need to be able to do that in all the languages that they have access to.
And in this context, you think that CPD can help EAP practitioners to critically engage with the dominance of English in academic context?
Yes, because if I was just teaching without engaging in scholarship and CPD, I wouldn't have the time to look at the texts that students are using. So I wouldn't have time to think about what is being communicated to the particular students. So I think it's sort of CPD for our teaching in lots of ways. It's that when we shouldn't just be kind of rolling out oh, let's read this thing and make sure that you can understand it, and we'll ask you some comprehension questions and then look at some vocabulary. It's asking students to engage, and so we have to do it first, engage with a text for the purpose that they're reading it, and think about what that purpose is, what questions are they being asked to discuss around it, and how are they have to critically engage with it. So we also have to critically engage with it. And I think at that point, all of the other forms of CPD, so an understanding around what we might understand decolonizing to be and mean, what we might understand critical thinking to be and mean within that particular context, practices around inclusion, sort of how students belong in a university. I think we have to bring all of those sort of CPD elements that across the higher education sector we're being asked to engage with and think about, and how does that text help the students that we're working with feel that they belong or that they don't belong? How does it help them think about whether something is colonial or not? So I think we're bringing all of our own development into the way that we would look at a text, and then the way that we deconstruct that text with students and think about it. We're also thinking, you know, if we're looking at a particular discipline, and if we're looking at an academic text, it is always within a particular discipline or interdisciplinary. What are the epistemologies of that discipline, and what is that saying about how they've written and how they've chosen to write?
Yeah.
So
yeah. You talk about like earlier. You talk about the deficit narratives.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that CPD can help us move beyond these narratives about multilingual students and instead recognize and build on their linguistic resources?
Yeah. I think we throw around this sort of deficit narrative. It's become to me one of those sort of phrases where people don't really know what they're talking. They talk about it and they use it, but I'm not sure that we all agree on what we mean by deficit. So for me, when I'm talking about the deficit narrative, I think it's around the idea that if students struggle to communicate their ideas in English, they are seen as intellectually in deficit in other ways, rather than not having the right word at their fingertips, which happens to all of us all the time anyway. So I think it goes back to the question that you were asking earlier around how we can kind of get that message around the importance of language visibility across the university, and that it is different. And I think it's really, really difficult to separate, because how do you separate language and thought anyway? It's hard. And if you've never thought in any other language other than English and never understood what that might mean and how that might sometimes fracture identities or kind of draw out different identities in different ways. If the only language you've ever communicated in is English, it's really difficult, even harder to separate the idea of language and thought out. So I think for us, it's finding ways of explaining that to other people. But I think also of understanding it ourselves. I think, I've got colleagues who still come back to English language proficiency and sort of say, but students are not good enough to do the subjects that they've got to do here. And I kind of understand what they mean. I think that the way that they explain it is quite clumsy. What they mean is they're going to find it really, really hard, given the approaches to teaching that exist in the UK in other disciplines, and the assumption that English is going to be fine. And I think people don't really understand what in Leeds 6.5 is the usual kind of cut-off for students to be able to study at postgraduate level. They don't understand what 6.5 in IELTS means. So I think IELTS has a lot of, there have to be English language tests. I accept that, and there isn't ever going to be a perfect one for all students. But there is work to be done in helping students feel confident in the English that they've got in order to be able to communicate and to read and to understand, because it's hard. So I think we need to be clear what we mean by deficit. I think language proficiency is not the same as intellectual deficit. And I think it like all forms of prejudice, it's something that our students have internalized about themselves quite often as well. So I think it's working with students to help them feel proud of the languages that they have access to, and not see it as a problem that they can be fluent. And so I allow my students to have conversations in whatever language they want whilst they're formulating their ideas in my classroom. And I then sort of say, but you have to understand that if you're talking in this language, I can't understand that, so I can't come in and help you. So at some point, you're going to have to find a way of translating these ideas into English so that I can tell you what I think, if you care about what I think at all. So I think enabling those conversations to happen, asking them to explain concepts, asking them to bring, so I just will say, do you have the same word in your own language? So it's really simple little things like that sometimes. And I think CPD for EAP teachers, still, given what I said about my own route in, I think it is still a common route in, and we're not taught how to do that in CELTA Delta stuff. So I think CPD for EAP, sometimes I talk about de-IELTSing students. I think we need to de-Cambridge teacher training EAP teachers to some extent. There's lots of things that I learned and I still use from those courses, from that training, but there's lots of things that I've had to change about the way that I teach when I'm kind of thinking about EAP. So I think, we just need to keep questioning our own practices and looking at the students that we've got in front of us and thinking about what are they doing, what are they using.
Yeah. In terms of practitioners these days, and with so many EAP professionals working under precarious conditions, what forms of CPD do you think could foster support, collaboration, and solidarity within the field?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot now. I mean, I think that the PIM that you're organising is an excellent example in that almost all of it is free, going to be freely available to everybody. So I think open access stuff. So I think sort of targeting journals that will provide open access to literature. And I think, a lot of all of the SIG, not all of it, well, most of the SIG kind of activity is free and available and I think online means that people don't have to travel, and that costs a lot, and you can access it globally. I think, I mean, ideally, if you are on a precarious contract and a sort of short-term contract, but is repeated every year, you should be seen as a member of staff for the institution where you come back in the UK every summer. And it would be great if you could maintain access to that university and its library. So I think that's something that we should be trying to work towards. And I think some institutions have managed it. We've been trying in Leeds for a long time to do something like that, and our HR system hasn't yet allowed us to do it, but we can keep working on things like that. I think making things open access through the Baleap website, the new Baleap journal will hopefully kind of help with things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing, it's kind of not CPD as such. I think the big problem in EAP still is that we don't have an agreed route into EAP or kind of sense of what the qualifications are. Until recently, I was very, very closely involved in kind of the recruitment of staff at Leeds, and that the number of times that I was asked, and you see it on the Baleap mailing list, am I better taking a Delta or doing an MA TESOL or something else or something else? And Gemma Campion's article about the learning never ending kind of talks about this, how the sort of the move from English language teaching into EAP is you become an EAP practitioner and then you learn about it rather than learning about it and then getting the job. And I think the Baleap TEAP fellowship is the same, that it's almost impossible to demonstrate that you meet the criteria to apply for associate fellow or senior fellow without already working in it. So it's a form of CPD, but wouldn't it be better if we all knew what we needed to do? And I think that's what kind of you really need to become a proper profession and discipline. You need to have an agreed knowledge base, which we have to an extent through the TEAP competency framework, but it doesn't really say what the knowledge base is, and an agreed kind of set of qualifications that this is what you need to do. And I think there's becoming increasing diversity actually in what different institutions are asking for. So if you're a precarious practitioner, it's soul destroying, time consuming, writing application after application for job after job after job. And if you don't know what each centre's asking for and looking for, that's even harder. And you don't quite know why you get selected or you don't get selected because you don't know what the expectations are. And so do you have to take another qualification? Do you have to do something else? Is hard, I think. And I think that's where really we need to be looking. What is our agreed knowledge base? Where do our boundaries and expectations lie as a profession?
Yeah. Like talking about this clearer route to professional development within EAP, sometimes institutional CPD is experienced as top-down.
Yeah.
Is there any space for more critical, reflective, or participatory approaches?
Yeah, I think the CPD is top down again in the summer, because it's about that everything is time constrained. If you're lucky, you have a week of CPD before you start teaching in the summer, and a lot of it is very sort of traditional CPD rather than scholarship in terms of it's like, this is how you use the systems that you're going to be using in this institution. And it's kind of administrative CPD. And it sort of has to be there so people can get on with the job. And then I think everything becomes very busy again, in terms of teaching and marking and all of that stuff. So the space that might be provided for more sort of participatory kind of and critical engagement gets eroded almost constantly. So I think, again, that's an issue of the sort of hamster wheel of EAP without time for reflection. And I think for precarious practitioners, it's really difficult to move away from that. There was, again, at the conference, and I can't remember, it was a university in London, and I can't remember which one it was. And they did work with their precarious practitioners to look at critical thinking on a pre-sessional, and they continued to work with them. What university was it? It'll come back to me, or I'll find. And I think they've just published, and it was was it no it was with Julio Jimenez. I can't remember where it was Westminster. And they have done, so they've done some real kind of good work with their precarious practitioners there to sort of really push them to move beyond that sort of administrative CPD. So I think there are possibilities. I would sort of say, I always feel like CPD itself is always going to be top down. It's about being able to do things within a particular institution. I think if we're moving away from CPD towards scholarship, that's where you really feel that you own the work and you're developing your own interests and areas. And again, that's about institutions providing time and space, and that brings us back to the marketisation. There's no money, no visible money involved in scholarship. Eventually, I think there is, because it grows your reputation, it makes you more secure, it gives you academic authority. So I think it's a false economy to not give practitioners the time to slowly engage in scholarship and follow their own interests, I think. Because I think, yeah, you're right, CPD is like, okay, how are you going to use this form of assessment, or how are we going to become more inclusive or decolonize? And not everybody is interested in those particular areas. Some people are really interested in it, so they should be given the space to engage. And then the CPD becomes more participatory, because within the centre, the CPD is fed by the scholarship that people have done. So I learn from other colleagues. So, I mean, I'm going to mention the artificial intelligence word again, that I still know nothing about. There are colleagues here who have engaged in it in a meaningful way and are learning a lot. I'm still giving them a bit of time, but sort of in the summer, my own CPD will be learning from them, because I don't have enough interest in it, or it scares me too much in terms of the vast array of things that are already out there. I'm kind of but my CPD will be learning from them. My scholarship is in something different that hopefully I can sort of transfer into CPD for other people. So I think it becomes a sort of virtuous circle eventually, but we need time.
Yeah.
And it's the economy to not give us time.
Yes. Besides being CPD often as a top-down kind of activity, it is also seen as just career development. What would it take to see it also as a platform for engaging with the broader social, political, and ethical issues shaping EAP today?
I'm not sure what it would take. I don't think it works if you engage in CPD purely for career development. I feel, to me, CPD and scholarship is part of our job. It's part of our responsibility to be better practitioners, to do our best for the students that we work with. And I think if you might engage. So I do online health and safety. My husband is a health and safety officer, so don't let him hear this. I do it because I have to. And so I know what colour fire extinguishers extinguish certain things. And I have to do it, and but I'm not interested in it because it's not going to directly impact. I don't think it's going to directly impact the work that I do with students. So that's what CPD for career purposes is for me. It's something that I have to do because my job tells me I have to do it, and I'm not particularly interested in it. CPD that I have a responsibility to do, I think, are things that I think are going to either teach me what I've been doing wrong, or teach me what I can do better for my students and for my colleagues. So I think it's an attitude, it's a stance, it's about your own personal ethics. So there will be some people who will engage in CPD and scholarship purely for instrumental reasons, because they think it's going to, you can add publications to your list and you might be able to get promotion or a better job. And there will be people who do that. But for me, it's an ethical position. It's something that you have to do to do better. We've got a responsibility to our students to know more about what we do and to give them the best that we possibly can. I'm not sure it's going to change the way that it's approached by everybody, but
Thank you very much. You have been very, very, very generous with your time, but I would like to ask you a final question, a final reflection, if that is okay. As we reimagine professional development in EAP to be more inclusive, decentered, and responsive to the diverse realities of multicultural, multilingual students and precariously placed staff, what questions or problems do you believe our community most urgently needs to discuss, to ask in these days?
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, the conversation that we're having today I've just read the social justice's SIG, the statement that they've just posted on the Baleap mailing list. And I think they cover a lot of the things that, I think it's something that Alex Ding and Ian Bruce and I have been talking about in different ways for quite a long time. And I think Alex Ding and I organised a sort of slow conference right at the beginning of COVID on precarity. I think precarity is it's not a new issue, but I think it's becoming more urgent, and I think we need to really think about how we can support colleagues on precarious contracts, how we can try and move away from the need for people to be on precarious contracts. So I think that's a really clear issue. I think all of the things that the sort of social justice SIG statement kind of covers, I think kind of how we can become more political in our positioning as EAP practitioners. I think it's vital that we do become political, but we can only do that by drawing on what our own. We can't be political for political sake, if that makes sense. We've got to be political, but from a position of where our own expertise lies, and that should be in kind of language, communication, kind of academic epistemology and understanding of kind of academic communication. So it's where we kind of position ourselves, I think, that's important, so that we're talking from a position of authority rather than being political about everything. And I think that's difficult because language is everywhere and everything, and particularly the English language. It's difficult to kind of work out where we should be kind of placing that fight. But I think for our own profession, it's looking at precarity. I think also we do have to, and I include myself, we have to seriously engage with what artificial intelligence is going to do, particularly around how other people perceive what it does in terms of language, and that feeds into the precarious nature of EAP. I think in order to do that, the questions that we should be asking of ourselves go back to Alex Ding and Ian Bruce's book for me, really, and that is, who are we as EAP practitioners? What actually do we mean when we're talking about EAP? So what is our knowledge base, and how do we express that in terms of what our academic authority is? Where do our boundaries lie as EAP practitioners? Because I think what we're seeing a lot, because of the precarious nature of EAP, is a lot of people start off as EAP practitioners and then move into academic development work or learning advisor work. and it's the same but different, or not this. I would say it's not the same. So I think we need to be really clear about who we are and what our knowledge base is, so that we can be clear about where our boundaries lie. And there's always going to be blurring, but we need to not blur to the point that you can't see the separation. So I think asking ourselves, how we want to be perceived, how we want to be seen. Do we want to be seen as a service, as something that lives in the third space, as on the margins, or do we want to be sort of seen as sort of central and vital to how universities, whether it's transnational universities, EMI, which I think UK universities essentially are now, or English only, but without the language policy that says they're English only universities, kind of function. And I think that's where we need to be positioning ourselves in order to address the issues around precarity, around artificial intelligence, the whole politics of kind of the colonial project of English language. So I think they're big questions, and they're going to take a lot of time to address. And I think it feels like everything's become very urgent at the moment, but it kind of feels like maybe we needed to be thinking about this sort of 8-10 years ago. And I'm not sure how we're going to manage the urgency now.
Okay. And with this brilliant reflection, I would like to thank you for your time. You know that I am a fan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your generosity. Is there anything else that I didn't ask that you would have liked to answer, or something that you would like to say?
No, I don't think there's anything that you haven't asked. I think later on today I'll decide that I wished I'd answered all of the questions in a slightly different way. So yeah, I suppose no, I think that's all I've got to say. But if there's anything that in my rambling that people have questions about, then I would be happy to try and clarify at a later date for people. or retract equally.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Vi, and see you soon. See you.